What if I told you that one of the UFC's fiercest champions, someone who knocked out legends and held the light heavyweight title, lost his fighting edge almost overnight? Evans was a powerhouse, a fan favorite, and a knockout artist. But one day, something changed. The killer instinct that once defined him seemed to vanish, and fans were left wondering, what happened to Rashad? Today, we will dive deep into Rashad's incredible rise to the top, his unforgettable victories, and the shocking, sudden decline that left the MMA world stunned. Rashad Evans grew up in Niagara Falls, New York. This wasn't the glamour of Vegas or the intensity of New York City. Niagara Falls was a small city, known more for its waterfalls than its fighters. Rashad came from a big family with 6 kids. Money was tight, and Rashad learned early on that nothing would be handed to him. As a kid, Rashad had a lot of energy. He was restless, always getting into something, and that energy needed an outlet. By the time he got to high school, he found it in wrestling. Wrestling was a lifeline for this young kid. Rashad quickly stood out, not because he was the biggest or the strongest, but because he was relentless. He wasn't the type to back down, even when he was outmatched. After high school, he took his wrestling skills to Michigan State University, competing at a high level. Now, college wrestling is a grind. It's intense, physically brutal, and mentally exhausting. And yet Rashad thrived in that environment. He wasn't the top guy, not even close. But he kept pushing, kept fighting. He had that grit, that hunger to prove himself. And while he didn't have dreams of being a pro wrestler, he had an undeniable talent. Little did he know this wrestling foundation would be the stepping stone to an entirely different career. His break came with The Ultimate Fighter, the UFC's reality show that gave unknown fighters a chance to win a contract with the UFC. Rashad entered the show in the heavyweight division, even though he was far smaller than most of his opponents. He was by far one of the smallest fighters in the competition. And yet that didn't deter him. Rashad thrived as the underdog, using his wrestling skills and relentless work ethic to grind out victories. When the finale came around, Rashad pulled off the impossible. He won the Ultimate Fighter against all odds, proving that size wasn't everything. He was scrappy, tough, and willing to put it all on the line, building his reputation. Once he secured his spot in the UFC, Rashad made a smart move. He dropped down to the light heavyweight division, his more natural weight class. Now he wasn't just fighting guys his size, he was facing opponents who were often slower and less agile. Rashad saw this as an opportunity to showcase the skills he had been developing. In his early UFC fights, Rashad was still somewhat of an enigma. He was known as a wrestler, but he had an explosiveness that hinted at something more. The fight against Sean Salmon became one of his most defining moments. Rashad was patient, calculated, and when the moment came, he threw a high kick that landed with brutal precision. Sean Salmon dropped instantly, and Rashad's reputation as a dangerous striker was born.
He's telling people that he's gonna, embarrass me, and he's doing it, and I'm losing this fight, and this guy's a nobody. And then I went and seen a kick, and I caught him with it.
People started talking about Rashad in a new way. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was a knockout artist, a guy who could take out opponents with a single blow. And with each fight, his confidence grew. Rashad developed a swagger, a style that fans loved. He'd go into the octagon, dismantle his opponents, and then celebrate with a dance, showing the world he was enjoying every minute of it. Rashad's undefeated record and his growing reputation as a knockout artist had the fans captivated. He was a rising star, and he was inching closer to a shot at the light heavyweight title. But Rashad wasn't just winning fights, he was creating moments, giving fans something to talk about. And then he had the victory that sealed the title shot for him, the unbelievable knockout of Chuck Liddell.
But I'll never forget, you hit him with that shot, he goes face down, and you could have heard, except for I think it was your wife at the time, you could have heard a fucking pin drop.
Championship era. Rashad's journey to the top led him to a title shot against Forrest Griffin. Now, Forrest was no joke. He was tough, gritty, and known for his willingness to go to war in the octagon. This was going to be Rashad's biggest test yet. But Rashad wasn't just confident, he was ready. The fight was intense. Forrest came out strong, using his reach and his unorthodox style to keep Rashad at bay. But Rashad was patient. He knew that if he could weather the storm, he would get his chance. And in the third round, that chance came. Rashad took Griffin down, got on top, and unleashed a brutal ground and pound that forced the referee to stop the fight. Rashad Evans was now the light heavyweight champion of the world. Holding that belt, Rashad felt on top of the world. He'd done what so few could. He had climbed to the peak of one of the toughest divisions in MMA. Rashad was undefeated, the champ, and he was riding high on confidence. The celebrations that followed were legendary. Rashad's dances, his swagger, he was having the time of his life and the fans loved it. Rashad was at his peak. He was the undefeated champion. Every interview, every public appearance, Rashad radiated confidence. He was living his dream. But as we would soon find out, the dream would be short-lived. The change begins. Every great fighter meets their match, and for Rashad, that match was Lyoto Machida. Now, Machida was a puzzle unlike anything Rashad had faced before. A striking wizard with a style that was notoriously hard to pin down. Machida was like a phantom in the octagon, elusive and unorthodox, and he had this uncanny ability to just stay out of reach, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Rashad knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he was confident he could break through Machida's defenses just like he had with everyone else. But that night, things didn't go as planned. From the start, Rashad looked cautious, almost like he was waiting for an opening that never came. Machida was calculated, patient, and lethal. Every time Rashad moved in, Machida would slip out of reach, delivering precise strikes that seemed to cut through Rashad's defenses like a hot knife through butter. Rashad kept trying, but the frustration was starting to show. He was swinging, but it was like he was swinging at air. And then, in the second round, it happened. Machida saw his opening and he went for it. A left hand landed cleanly on Rashad's chin, and it was like time froze. Rashad staggered and Machida pounced. He unleashed a brutal combination, and with each punch, Rashad's body went limp, the lights dimming in his eyes. The ref stepped in, and it was over. Rashad was out cold, sprawled on the canvas, his undefeated record shattered.
Yeah. And then he catches me with the punch, and I remember feeling like I'm stuck, and all of a sudden I fall, and then I go out for a second, and then I come back to, and then I see the doctor. Dang.
So you were only out for a few seconds.
It felt like a few
It's like
seconds.
I talked to Ben Askren after that big knee from Hospital. And
Yeah.
He's like, oh yeah, I woke up and I was in the hospital. Like that was the next thing he remembered.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah.
I was out for a few seconds, but it was a good knockout. Like I remember.
This was Rashad's first loss, and it was devastating. Not just physically, but mentally. For a fighter who had built his career on confidence, on being the guy who couldn't be beaten, this was a tough pill to swallow. And it wasn't just the loss, it was the way that he lost. Rashad had always been the predator, the guy who finished fights. But that night, he was the prey. Machida had exposed a vulnerability in him, and that is not something that you easily forget. From that point on, something changed in Rashad. He was still a great fighter, still one of the best, but that unshakable confidence, the belief that he could beat anyone, had taken a hit. Then came on Jon Jones. The story with Jon Jones was different. It wasn't just a fight. It was a saga, a soap opera with enough drama to fill a whole season of reality TV. Rashad and Jones weren't just opponents. They were friends, training partners, almost like brothers. They trained together at Jackson Wink MMA in Albuquerque, one of the top gyms in the world. Rashad had been there for years, a respected member of the team, and he had watched Jones come up. Jones was young, brash, and insanely talented, and Rashad took him under his wing, guiding him, mentoring him. They sparred together, sweated together, and shared that unique bond that only fighters can understand. But as Jones's star began to rise, tensions grew. Jones was on a meteoric path and people started talking about him as the future of the division, even the future of the sport. Rashad was still in the mix, still one of the top contenders, and there was an unspoken rivalry simmering beneath the surface. When Jones got the title shot that Rashad had been eyeing, it felt like a betrayal. It was as if the young prodigy was stepping on his mentor's toes, taking what should have been his. The media ate it up. They painted it as a clash between friends, a betrayal, a showdown that was more than just a fight. Rashad and Jones started trading barbs in interviews, and things got heated. Rashad felt disrespected, overlooked. He had been there, putting in the work, building the gym's reputation, and now this young guy was stealing his thunder. Jones, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. He was focused on one thing: winning. As the fight drew closer, the tension reached a boiling point. Rashad left Jackson Wink, a place that he had called home, because he couldn't stand to be around Jones. The gym was divided, with some fighters siding with Rashad and others with Jones. It was a messy breakup, a split that left Rashad feeling isolated, like he'd not just lost a gym, but a family. When fight night finally came, all eyes were on them. This wasn't just a title fight, it was a grudge match, a showdown between two men who had once been brothers in arms. But from the start, it was clear that Jones had the upper hand. He was younger, faster, and his reach gave him a significant advantage. Rashad tried to close the distance, but every time he moved in, Jones would counter. By the end, there was no doubt Jones had won decisively.
You know when I thought the fight turned against you? Was when he grabbed your hands and then came over with the elbow. I noticed your reaction after that was different than any other reaction.
Listen.
For Rashad, this loss was more than just another defeat. It was a culmination of everything that had gone wrong. He had lost his title, his gym, and his confidence. The man who had once been on top of the world, who had danced in victory and held the belt high, was now struggling to find his footing, and it showed. The decline. After the Jones fight, things started to unravel for Rashad. He had the skills, the experience, but there was something missing. In his fight against Antonio Rogerio Nogueira, fans saw the first real signs that Rashad wasn't the same fighter that he used to be. Nogueira was a solid opponent, but he wasn't considered a major threat. This was supposed to be a bounce-back fight for Rashad, a chance to get back in the win column. But that's not what happened. From the opening bell, something was off. Rashad wasn't moving the way that he used to. His timing was off. His punches lacked the usual snap. And most troubling of all, he seemed hesitant. Rashad wasn't pulling the trigger, wasn't committing to his strikes. It was like he was holding back, almost as if he was afraid to get hit. Fans and analysts noticed it immediately. The once fearless Rashad Evans, the guy who had knocked out legends, now looked tentative and uncertain. As the fight went on, it became clear that Rashad was struggling. He wasn't engaging, wasn't taking risks. He was still a skilled fighter, still able to hold his own, but the killer instinct, the drive to finish the fight, was gone. Nogueira won the fight by decision, and for Rashad, it was a crushing blow. This wasn't just a loss, it was a sign that something deeper was wrong. And it didn't get better. Fight after fight, Rashad seemed to be a shadow of his former self. The aggression, the confidence, the swagger, it was all gone. He went on a 5-fight losing streak, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. For fans, it was heartbreaking. They had watched Rashad go from the top of the world to struggling just to survive in the octagon.
It's frustrating, it's hurtful, and it's something that's totally unexpected, but it's part of the sport.
Experts and analysts started talking about Rashad's inability to pull the trigger. It was like he had lost that split-second decisiveness, the willingness to commit to his strikes. He'd hesitate, second-guess himself, and by the time he threw a punch, it was too late. He wasn't the same Rashad who had knocked out Liddell with a single punch, who had danced in victory. That Rashad was gone. The losses took a toll, not just on Rashad's record, but on his mind. It was like he was fighting himself as much as he was fighting his opponents. The UFC even denied him licenses to fight at one point, citing concerns about his health. Rashad Evans, once the undefeated champion, was now struggling just to get a sanctioned fight. Analysis. So, what happened? How does a fighter like Rashad Evans go from champion to hesitant almost overnight? Sports psychologists have a term for it: the yips. It's when an athlete loses their mental edge, when something in their mind holds them back, prevents them from performing at their best. For golfers, it might mean missing an easy putt. For a baseball player, it might mean struggling to throw a pitch. And for a fighter like Rashad, it meant hesitating, second-guessing himself in the octagon. The yips aren't just about nerves. They're about a loss of confidence, a mental block that can cripple even the best athletes. For Rashad, it seemed like that mental block was stopping him from being the fighter that he once was. He had lost that killer instinct, the willingness to take risks, to throw caution to the wind and go for the knockout. And in a sport as brutal as MMA, that loss of confidence can be fatal.
But really just staring into the part of whatever the situation is that hurt me until I start to gain perspective over it. But here's the thing about it. You have to go through that pain.
Other fighters have experienced similar struggles. It's something that isn't often talked about, but it's there. Just look at what happened to Tony Ferguson after his devastating loss to Justin Gaethje. Fighting isn't just about physical strength or technique. It's about mental toughness, about having the confidence to step into the octagon and believe that you're going to win. When that confidence is shaken, when that mental edge is gone, it is almost impossible to get it back. Watching footage of Rashad in his prime and then seeing him in his decline, it's like watching two different people. The Rashad who danced in victory, who knocked out legends, is a far cry from the Rashad who struggled to pull the trigger, who hesitated in the octagon. The contrast is stark, and it's a reminder of just how brutal this sport can be. Aftermath. After retiring, Rashad found a new purpose in the fight game. He became a commentator, using his knowledge to break down fights for fans. Rashad's insights and passion for the sport made him a respected voice in MMA. And in 2019, he was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame, a fitting tribute to a man who had achieved so much. Rashad's legacy is a reminder of the highs and lows of fighting. One moment you're the champion, untouchable. The next, you're struggling to throw a punch.